What if I told you the problem with fetishization isn't actually having fetishes, but rather how we express those fetishes? Because we all have them, and they're not evil. Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here. This is a video I've been wanting to make for a long time now, but I've never found the right opportunity. However, now that people are calling out Genshin Impact's new Sumeru region and belly dancing as examples of fetishizing and orientalizing Middle Eastern cultures, I can't put it off anymore. Belly dancing, or dare I call it harem clothes, or whatever, is one of my favorite aesthetics. And just because I'm finding out that this sort of design is actually the product of colonization from the West, that doesn't mean I'm gonna cancel something that's so friggin' beautiful. I mean, seriously, look at these Sumeru designs. I don't think it's fair for me to think of myself as some kind of villain in order to continue appreciating them. I certainly don't think I'm trying to hurt other people for liking what I like, so I'm inclined to think there's a big misunderstanding here. Debate started when an artist on Twitter posted this lovely piece of fan art. In response, angry Twitterites have attacked it as an example of Orientalism, with people demanding artists stop sexualizing Swana culture. If you didn't know, Swana stands for Southwest Asian/North African, a term being supplemented as a replacement for all the colonial terms we use, such as Middle Eastern, Arabic, and Islamic. Fair enough, though it's kinda sad to see that the first result on Google for Swana isn't their organization, but rather the Solid Waste Association of North America. Ugh. Another term that's relevant is Menat, or Middle East, North Africa, Greece, and Turkey. On paper, I can kinda sorta understand the complaints, even though I don't agree with them. A lot of media, especially popular entertainment, presents Middle Eastern culture through a bit of a stereotypical lens. What we see isn't authentic Swana cultures, but rather a sensationalized, exoticized version that is only loosely based on them. Look no further than Genshin Impact, which has introduced its new Sumeru region. While it's never explicitly stated by the game's developers, it's obvious they built Genshin Impact's world with theming from other regions. Sumeru, in this case, is presumably modeled off the Middle East. Many are complaining that the Sumeru characters are too white and too revealing, and that they aren't an accurate portrayal of Swana cultures. Even though Hoyoverse states that their games do not actually represent real people or places, a part of the community still condemns the company for appropriating aspects of their culture, which they interpret as mocking and disrespectful. The main issue I have with this take is that, for the most part, fans of Genshin are really excited about the new region, and are simply expressing how much they enjoy the designs. Said designs may not be authentic, but whoever said they had to be? I want to try and start off on the right foot by clarifying that I don't agree with colonization. It's messed up. The idea of mocking and disrespecting a culture is deplorable, forcing it to change to fit your standards. However, that's not what's happening here. I implore you to look at things from the other side. Hopefully you'll realize that the people enjoying this kind of aesthetic aren't intending to hurt you. Instead, they're just borrowing ideas from other cultures and reinventing them as something different, enjoying it in a form where it doesn't have to impede on those original cultures. Let's segue into fetishization. Belly dancing is a perfect example because, as it turns out, belly dancing isn't a thing any specific Swana culture practices. There are a variety of different dances practiced by various different cultures that more or less got lumped together during Western colonization. These dancers were seen as exotic and scandalous to Westerners, who likened them to eroticism. To survive in a global market, many of these dancers went with the flow, using their culture as a product of sorts under the generic term belly dancing. In a lot of Western countries, belly dancing has been associated with cabaret and strip clubs rather than a respectable art form, which really sucks. As Yame, a Brazilian-American dance instructor, puts it, the picture of me sexily shaking my bits in a sparkly two-piece costume does not even begin to account for everything this dance is, everything it represents, and everything that is involved when someone decides to seriously learn belly dance. The costume and the movement are only a tiny fraction of what this dance actually is or could be. Sure, there's no denying that belly dancing, or even those original dances that inspired it, can be extremely sexy, but that doesn't mean they should be limited to arousal or thought of as sexual in a derogatory way. It's the exact same issue when I made a video about schoolgirl outfits in games getting censored. You've got the uniforms girls actually wear to school, and you also have the idealized version you find in parody shops, just for lovers when they get hanky-panky. Just because something can be found sexy doesn't make it inherently sexual. Context is important, and there's a time and a place for both. Turns out, this logic also applies to fetishes. To get to the bottom of this, we need a working definition of what fetishization even is. My gut reaction is to always think of erotic fetishes, or kinks. Someone who has a foot fetish gets attracted to feet, and the reason it's a fetish is because feet aren't necessarily part of reproduction. In other words, fetishes represent when you're aroused by something that isn't inherently intended to be arousing. That said, we need a much broader definition to encapsulate the type of fetishization being described by online activists. Probably the best way I've seen it put is that fetishization is when you put an unnecessary importance on something superficial. Going back to the foot fetish, it can be said that, given the context of reproduction, the state and appearance of someone's feet may be weird to focus on. It is a superficial aspect of mating, yet there are people out there who'll choose their partners perhaps exclusively based on their feet. The reason some people don't like fetishes is because they appear to boil down entire people, races, and cultures into superficial aspects that get obsessed over. For example, let's consider a fetish for Asians. If you're Asian and someone is attracted to you, it might seem kinda messed up because they may not be liking you for who you are, but rather some aspect about you that you can't even control. They might not even care if you're Japanese, Chinese, Korean, or Filipino, so long as you match that Asian body type they're looking for. In the case of Genshin and belly dancers, it appears Hoyoverse is valuing parts of Swana aesthetic without caring about the culture itself. That's the ignorant attitude implied when people talk about Orientalism, or the fetishization of Asian cultures. It's where the cringe comes from when people unironically use the term weeb to describe someone who simps Japanese culture, but has only ever experienced it through anime and games. Similarly, there are Koreaboos who claim to love Korean culture, but view it exclusively through K-pop, which happens to be a very commercialized product far removed from the nation's roots. On the surface, it may seem like there's nothing to complain about, since they're appreciating something about you. However, the danger comes in realizing they don't actually appreciate you, but rather an ideal of you. Now, it may seem like I'm actually defending the opposition here, supporting their hate of Genshin Impact, but for the most part, I'm actually just playing devil's advocate. What I just described to you is the most pessimistic way to interpret a fetish, and of course it's the interpretation people go with when they're trying to attack something that offends them. However, this perspective on fetishization has some fundamental flaws. First, it assumes that when you fetishize someone or something, you are only concerned with those superficial elements. It implies that the fetishist is objectifying their target, treating them not as an entire person, but a commodity to enjoy. Going back to belly dancing, there are indeed some people who don't see it as an art form, but rather just a tool for carnal lust. Some may look at a belly dancer and think that they, and by extension the cultures they derive from, are nothing but glorified prostitutes. However, that's not how everyone actually feels. Just because you're attracted to or aroused by something, that doesn't mean you don't respect it, or can't put aside your libido in favor of other merits. Likewise, if you're into Asians, that doesn't mean you don't care about your partner's personality, history, ethnicity, etc. Second, who's the arbiter who gets to decide what is or isn't a superficial obsession? Of course, there are some objective situations we can look at. It would be pretty messed up to demand an athlete wear a certain color or style of outfit just because it arouses you. Assuming it doesn't affect their performance, an athlete should wear whatever's comfortable and functional for them, because the context is efficiency at the sport, not necessarily fashion. Similarly, refusing to hire someone because they don't fit your fetish is also awful, assuming that the applicant is qualified and skilled at the job. Notice, however, that this is less about the fetish itself and more about how it's being expressed. I can acknowledge that women don't necessarily wear sports bras to please onlookers, but that doesn't make me evil for appreciating them in the privacy of my mind. To me, it's an important thing, something that makes me happy. Of course it's not necessary, but superficial is a loaded term. Humans are complex creatures who base our lives around unnecessary things. It's okay to be passionate about something that isn't imperative to your survival. I'd argue that's where the vast majority of artistic freedom comes from. In a more optimistic sense, fetishes are passions, and in their most basic form, there's no major distinction between the two. A fetish is just a demonized term for preference. This brings me to my third counterpoint, which is that because we all have passions, we all have our own fetishes. Don't kid yourself. How much of your day do you spend doing things that aren't necessary? How many things do you happen to enjoy that you don't need? One of the very same people complaining about Genshin's fetishization of Orientalism happened to like some fan art of a girl shredding cheese on her ripped abs. That's about as fetishized as it gets. Mind you, I love these abs too, but the difference here is that I'm not condemning people for what they're passionate about. Hopefully by now, I've shown how fetishes aren't a bad thing. What is bad is how people behave regarding them. It's not wrong to have a cleavage fetish, but it is wrong to fire your secretary for not showing enough of her own cleavage. It's not wrong to find someone attractive, but it is wrong to make unwanted advances on them. It's not wrong to have a twink fetish, but it is wrong to pressure someone into submission. It's not wrong to fetishize chiseled abs, but it is wrong to run up to someone and touch their stomach without their permission. When it comes to Genshin Impact and the Sumeru designs, it's not wrong to enjoy or be attracted to them. It would be wrong, however, to start stereotyping and thinking less of Swana cultures, or to perhaps demand that Swana people start behaving like this fantastical archetype. Thankfully, that's not happening either, not with the vast majority of fans anyway. If it's wrong to impose your fetish onto other people, then what are some healthy ways to express yourself? I suppose there's always the chance that you'll find someone who understands and embraces your fetishes, but that doesn't necessarily work if your fetishes are simply unattainable or unrealistic. So what then? One of the most important videos on my channel is called "Women Do Not Own Anime Women." In it, I refute the idea that anime waifus create unrealistic expectations of real women. I argue against the idea that women should have a say in how fictional women are presented, because even if you are a woman, that doesn't make you women in the broad sense. The idea of a woman is still something separate from you. Despite the popular cultural narrative, female characters on screen do not exist to represent women in the real world. Many authors and artists choose to create these women in order to have as little to do with real women as possible. They simply want to explore their fetishes and fantasies in a fictional space, where they don't impose on anyone's individual autonomy. For those of us who are capable of separating fiction from reality, this is a healthy way to express ourselves. Are there women who will feel insecure about not adequately matching up to the idealized depiction of waifus? Yes. Are there jerks out there who will treat a woman like crap because she's not the same as their waifu? Sure. Hell, there are assholes out there who will treat a woman poorly because they happen to resemble a fictional character. I won't deny that these are genuine issues, but I refuse to blame the existence of fictional ideals for it. Going back to Sumeru, the worlds in Genshin Impact are only loosely inspired by real life. Even the European regions like Mondstadt are only whimsical fairy tale versions of the Western world. There are anime like Attack on Titan, Youjo Senki, and Spy X Family that repurpose European culture and history for their own fantasies. In the case of Spy X Family, that world is made by and for Japanese people, which is why a lot of the food the characters eat in the show are oddly Japanese, despite it taking place in an older, fictional version of Germany. The author set out to use bits and pieces they liked from the real world, but ultimately altered them for the sake of their own fantasy. Full Metal Alchemist even has a dude called the Führer, and instead of being a one-to-one copy of Adolf, he's a violent homunculus with a separate identity. Sumeru is exactly the same. It only resembles Swana in the most superficial ways. Rather than representing the people there with matching skin colors and authentic outfits, Hoyoverse instead decided to go with a sensationalized version of the region that matches their artistic goals and sensibilities. In other words, Sumeru is not Swana, nor does it have to be. The artists and fans may be fetishizing this themed region, but they're doing so in the context of a fictional world that they specifically don't want to impose on a real place. The people who are upset by Sumeru insist that because Swana isn't represented properly in most of the world, Genshin is teaching people false things about Swana cultures. They're claiming actual harm, but honestly, that's not Genshin's fault. Admittedly, I don't know much about authentic Swana cultures, but that doesn't mean I'm pretending to be an expert of them either. It's not like if I took an international flight to that part of the world, I'd go around telling people to show off more skin. If I were designing my own fictional fantasy world, however, I'd want a lot of it to have more of that belly dancing aesthetic, not just in the Middle East, but in all sorts of other places because I think it's cool and beautiful. Just like violent games don't inherently make violent people, Genshin's depiction of Sumeru doesn't make people ignorant and racist of Swana cultures. The factors behind that are more complex, and artists should have a right to make whatever fiction they want and keep it separate from the real world. That's the heart of escapism, and while these fantasies are indeed fetishizing a colonized Middle Eastern ideal, they're doing so in the only safe context available to them. At the end of the day, when an artist sits down to draw this, or this, or this, they aren't necessarily trying to hurt you. To the vast majority of people, it's a fun fantasy that doesn't carry over into reality. You can love Sumeru and realize that Swana cultures are quite a bit different, just as you can be a total K-pop stan and realize Korea is more than supermodels dancing sexily to catchy tunes. I just hate seeing something that brings me sincere joy cause frustration and vitriol for someone else. In that regard, all I can share is my own perspective and try to show that it's not hateful. Do you all agree on this, or am I full of crap? Should this art really be blamed for problematic behaviors in the real world? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters. Video Gamer 75, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Freebrick, Cosmonaut, RNGer Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Johnny Tsunami, Link Pendrago, Brandon Baker, Caitlin P, Vladimir Rovna, Succubus Sakura, Normace, Jonathan Padua, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much.